Global extreme survival has become a reality because the blue planet's resources have run dry. Every country will choose 100 participants, and any resources they secure will be sent home multiplied by 10. Out of thousands, I, a simple college student, suddenly find myself on the list of participants. Nobody would bet a single cent on a scrawny college kid in a survival challenge. He'll definitely starve on day one, they say, but they don't know my secret. They think I'm just another face in the crowd who cares about nothing but looks. But my true passion is hardcore outdoor exploration. Even if I were abandoned in a virgin jungle, I could survive on my own for 2.5 years. I open my eyes in the middle of a wild forest as a cold voice echoes. Welcome to the strange wilderness. There are 11,700 participants. Everyone receives a protective suit and a standard-issue survival kit. I get a multifunctional backpack, a thermal blanket, and 3 random survival tools. I need to see what I'm working with, so I immediately rip open the bag I just received. Inside, I find a trench shovel, a small iron pot, and a roll of fishing line. At that moment, the hearts of everyone watching the live stream sank for me. It turns out Jack, representing the Lighthouse Nation, pulled a military dagger, a flint, and a bow. The guy from the Fur Nation got a combat knife and a first aid kit, gear that's light years ahead of mine. What kind of trash equipment is that? The comments sneer. That scrawny college kid won't even last a single day. The gear from the Lighthouse and Fur Nations is on a completely different level. The gap between us is massive. Just as the global audience was heatedly debating everyone's gear, a cold voice echoed over everyone's heads. It was a sudden, chilling announcement. Participant Abdul has been eliminated by a giant grizzly bear. Current survivor count, 11,699. Everyone tensed up instantly, realizing this was a literal trial of life and death. Meanwhile, I had just finished putting on my protective suit. I hoisted my backpack and began observing my surroundings. High humidity, soft soil, and lush vegetation. This is a classic temperate deciduous forest. Judging by the sun directly over my head, it must be around 10 in the morning. Right then, a system interface flashed across my retina. Welcome to the survival check-in system. Current location, strange wilderness forest. Granting host starter pack, master level environmental perception. Instantly, a strange power flooded into my brain. I could sense the exact direction of the wind, the precise humidity, the subtle traces in the dirt, the patterns of animal activity, and the health of the plants. All this information rushed into my senses like a rising tide. There's a stream 300 meters away. The water is crystal clear and safe to drink directly. And 700 meters to the northwest, there's a natural cave, perfect for a shelter. And right in front of me, there was fresh grizzly bear droppings, meaning large predators were nearby. This is master-level environmental perception. With this, I'll be eating like a king in 3 days. Meanwhile, in the Dragon Nation's capital, hundreds of survival experts gathered in a massive conference hall. On Lung Yu's channel, 80 million people were tuned in. On Chenu's channel, 60 million people. But on my channel, barely 300,000 people were watching. Most thought a college kid had nothing to show. At that moment, a middle-aged man rushed into the meeting room. It was Li Jianjun, the minister of the Emergency Management Department. He announced we must establish a Supreme Command Center to provide technical and psychological support. The rules allowed each nation to send one 100-word message to their participants every week. While they planned, I was already heading toward the stream 300 meters away. When the water appeared before my eyes, I couldn't help but smile. It looked incredibly clean. The occasional fluorescent shimmer in the water confirmed it was high-quality, natural spring water. It was perfect for fishing. I needed to solve my food problem first. I swung my backpack off my shoulders. I reached inside and pulled out my fishing line and a hook. Then, I found a sturdy branch and fashioned it into a makeshift fishing rod. After digging into the soft earth with my survival shovel, I dug up a few fat earthworms that appeared right before my eyes. In the stream's chat, some viewers were already getting impatient. Why isn't anything biting? There probably aren't even any fish here. But right then, the fishing line suddenly snapped taut. I gripped the rod tight, feeling a massive tug from beneath the surface. This fish had to weigh at least 5 pounds. It thrashed wildly in the water, desperate to shake the hook. But my technique was flawless. Instead of yanking the rod, I guided the fish toward the shallows. Finally, I dragged a 2-foot-long carp onto the shore. At that exact moment, the cold voice of the system echoed across the world. First resource acquisition detected, activating the 10,000-fold return mechanism. The Dragon Nation receives 10,000 wild carp. In the capital's central plaza, a massive pillar of light descended from the sky. 10,000 carp appeared out of thin air, piled up like a small mountain. The stream chat exploded, and my viewership skyrocketed to 3 million. Holy crap, the 10,000-fold return is real. This kid is a legend. Unaware of the chaos I'd caused with a single fish, I cast my line again. In less than 10 minutes, I hooked a second fish, even bigger than the first. But this time, the system's voice remained silent. The contestant from Japan, Matsushita, has obtained a resource, 30,000 mushrooms. But they're all poisonous. Looks like karma finally caught up to them. They got exactly what they deserved, those idiots. That stupid Matsushita really messed up this time. The Indian player found rot, rewarding his country with 150,000 pieces of rotten fruit. The Korean player, Yao Duan Yao, caught a stinking fish. Now Korea has 20,000 of them. The rewards for other countries are a joke compared to my divine carp. The Dragon Nation viewers were dying of laughter at the massive gap between us. Suddenly, another system notification rang out. Lung Yu has caught a wild hare. There she was, standing over an injured rabbit trembling on the ground. Lung Yu whispered, "Little one, I hope you're reborn in a better place next time." It was already 3 in the afternoon, and I needed to move. I opened the shop and hit buy. I activated my skill and pulled out a specialized tool. I used my sapper shovel to clean the fish with clinical precision. I decided to set up camp near this water source for the night. The cave I'd sensed earlier seemed like the perfect spot. As I carried my catch toward the cave, the roar of a brown bear echoed through the trees. A moment later, the desperate cry of a deer followed from the distance. So, there's a brown bear hunting nearby. I stopped dead in my tracks, locking my eyes on the source of the sound. I know brown bears possess terrifying speed and crushing power, so I stay perfectly still. The noise echoes in the distance, and my heart starts racing, not from fear, but pure excitement. This place has a steady source of clean water, plenty of fish, and lush vegetation. If that cave is safe enough to live in, then the bear is the one who should be afraid of me. In my past life, I faced massive wild beasts more than once, wolf packs, boars, even tigers. The key is using the right method and finding the perfect moment to strike. I use intelligence, not brute force, to take these beasts down with ease. After observing the area for 2.5 minutes, I decide to walk in the opposite direction of the brown bear to avoid it for now. Along the way, I constantly crouch down to gather dry branches from the ground. It takes me 10 minutes to cover a distance of 800 meters. It's not because the path is difficult, but because I never stop scanning my surroundings. My master-level environmental perception makes my brain function like a precision radar. I'm constantly gathering useful information about the terrain. Finally, the stone cave appears before my eyes, offering shelter from the wind and rain. The problem is the space. It's way too small for long-term living. I'll have to settle for now, so I drop my backpack in a corner with a sigh. Next step, survival. I grab a handful of leaf litter and 2 specific pieces of wood. Using one as a base and the other as a drill, I grip the wood and start spinning it rapidly. Starting a fire with sticks is child's play for me after 2.5 years of survival training. 2 minutes later, a thin pillar of smoke rises, and I begin preparing my dinner. I skewer the 3 fish onto a wooden branch and set them to roast over the flames. 10 minutes pass, and the fish are ready, perfectly crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. While participants from other countries are still scavenging for wild berries, I'm feasting. I'm not just eating roasted fish, I've even got a pot of water coming to a boil. Just as I rub my belly in satisfaction, my master-level environmental perception flares up. It sends a sudden, sharp message to my brain about something nearby. There's a special herbaceous plant growing right near the cave entrance. It's not just for tea, it apparently has powerful aphrodisiac effects. What a find. I drop the fish in my hand and head out to search immediately. Sure enough, tucked against a rock, I find several thin, green stalks. It's namsa grass, and I manage to harvest 10 stalks of it. A rare resource has been detected. The Dragon Nation receives 100,000 units of namsa grass. The entire world freezes for 3 seconds before the internet absolutely explodes. The comments go wild. An aphrodisiac? Manhwa is doing a massive favor for every man in the country. I take the longzu herb I just gathered and toss it into my small iron pot. A fresh, aromatic fragrance fills the air as I take a sip of the tea and a bite of fish. After finishing 2 of the fish, I'm at about 80% capacity. I'll save the last one for tomorrow as night falls, clear and free of light pollution. I just have to look up to see the entire Milky Way stretching across the sky. I take a quick look at the global data panel. Current worldwide death toll, 127 people. This many dead on the very first day? I can only hope everyone back in the Dragon Nation can hold on. I toss a few more heavy logs onto the fire to keep it burning. Using my fishing line and the iron pot, I rig up a simple alarm system. The comments erupt. Manhwa is a pro. He even built a perimeter alert. While other participants are shivering in fear, I'm already enjoying the good life. Once everything is set, I grip my entrenching shovel tight and drift off to sleep. At dawn, the first ray of sunlight hits my face. I stretch lazily and wonder what's on the agenda today as my master perception flares again. 2 kilometers southwest, there's a pheasant nest. Looks like fish isn't on the menu today. I quickly pack up all my gear. If I don't find a better spot out there, I'll come back to this cave. I head toward the pheasant nest, moving at a steady, cautious pace. To hunt a pheasant successfully, my shovel isn't going to be enough. I need a spear to give me more reach and compensate for a human's lack of speed. I mentally run through the requirements for a perfect spear shaft. It needs to be straight, hard, the right length, and have a balanced weight. Half an hour later, I find the right tree and use my shovel to climb it with ease. One single strike with my shovel is all it takes to get the perfect wooden branch. I use the sharp edge of my entrenching tool to carve the wood, bit by bit, until the spearhead takes shape. On the way, I finish off the leftover roasted fish from yesterday to keep my energy up. I keep a sharp eye on my surroundings as I move. My ability to multitask like this leaves the live chat audience completely stunned. Satisfied, I swing the spear a couple of times. It's time to go find those pheasants. But just as I head toward the nest, the live chats across China suddenly explode. Brothers, hurry up and go check out the Japanese stream. Holy crap, something huge is happening with the Japs. It turns out that on the Japanese broadcast, 2 of their contestants actually managed to meet up. The Kunoichi Matsushita Tisa and the southern fighter Xiao Bishai Si found each other. Haha, the heavens are helping our great nation. To think I'd actually find a teammate. Right in front of billions of viewers from all over the world. The 2 of them embraced in a greeting. Then, the transmission suddenly cut out with a system notification. Contestant has closed the stream. As it turns out, each contestant can pause their broadcast for 2.5 hours a day. The global audience was left staring at a blank screen. Everyone was completely speechless. There was a dead silence for a long moment. And then, total chaos broke loose. At the Japanese headquarters, the high command went from celebrating to turning green with rage. Idiots, is this really the time to be flirting? Meanwhile, I had absolutely no idea about the drama unfolding in the outside world. I was completely focused, moving steadily toward the pheasant nest. My master-level environmental perception kept feeding me a constant stream of data. 100 meters ahead, 3 pheasants were foraging for food. 2 adults and 1 chick. The little one was about half the size of a full-grown bird. Perfect 2.5 birds. Time to test my aim. I came to a halt when I was just 5 meters away. The 2 adults were pecking at insects while the chick hopped around beside them. Suddenly, I put my weight into it and hurled the spear. The tip pierced right through one of the adults, while the other 2 scattered in terror. The system notification rang out. Resource acquisition detected. Reward, 10,000 wild pheasants. In the central squares of the major cities back home, 10,000 lively, wild pheasants materialized out of thin air. The sound of frantic clucking echoed through the sky. The scene was absolutely spectacular. 10,000 pheasants. Our fire god is the real deal. My viewer count surged past 500 million in an instant. Hey, what are you doing? Meanwhile, I was already walking through the forest with the pheasant in hand. My master-level environmental perception alerted me. A swamp lay 200 meters ahead to the left. 300 meters to the right was a small puddle, but the water was murky. I shook my head. It looked like I'd have to head back to the same spot as yesterday. Returning to my fishing hole, I began prepping the pheasant. I realized these feathers could be useful later for stabilizing arrows. I tossed the ineatable guts into the water as bait. In a little while, the fish would swarm together in a massive school. That would make catching them a breeze. After quickly clearing an area, I started a campfire to roast the bird while I fished. Maybe it was the guts acting as the perfect lure, but in the next 30 minutes, I hauled in a massive catch. The system notification flashed. Resource acquisition detected. The Dragon Kingdom receives 30,000 mixed freshwater fish. My viewership instantly surged past 800 million. While I ate my roasted pheasant, I cleaned and prepped the fish to roast them all together. It looked delicious. Right at that moment, the system issued a new notification. The Dragon Kingdom contestant has obtained a resource, 50 wild kiwis. The kingdom receives 500,000 wild kiwis, but then, news arrived of Li Min's death by a wild beast. The news of my countryman's death weighed heavily on me. In the wild, a momentary impulse is often fatal, and Li Min's death served as a warning. Even with my environmental perception skill, I can't afford to lower my guard. I stopped eating, packed the leftovers into my bag, and extinguished the campfire. I gripped the military shovel in my hand, turned around, and headed deeper into the woods. Wow, where is he going? He must feel terrible after his fellow citizen just died. That was the commentary from Chunyi, the Dragon Kingdom's survival expert. He isn't depressed. On the contrary, he is more focused than ever. Chunyi was right. My mind was clearer than it had ever been. I needed a bow, a powerful one. After walking for about 2 or 3 kilometers, my environmental perception suddenly triggered an intense signal. 300 meters away, it detected a large forest of high-quality bamboo. I stopped in my tracks, my eyes lighting up at the possibilities. Bamboo for tools, shoots for food, and the perfect material for a bow frame. I picked up the pace, and soon, the bamboo forest appeared before me. I stepped closer to inspect the quality. Not bad at all. Every stalk was over 3 years old with top-tier elasticity. I rubbed my chin, lost in thought. I had the material for the bow's frame, but what could I use for the string? If I used fishing line, it would definitely snap after just a few shots. Then it hit me. Mulberry bark, stripped, soaked, beaten, and twisted into a 3-strand fiber cord. The vegetation in this world was remarkably similar to Earth's. If there was bamboo here, there was a high chance of finding something else. I was betting on finding mulberry trees nearby. Decision made. I didn't waste another second. I gripped my military shovel tightly. I started hacking away at the base of the first bamboo stalk. Then a second one fell, and a third. I wasn't just making a bow. I needed a mountain of arrows and defensive stakes for traps. I have obtained a massive amount of a strategic resource, purple bamboo. The Dragon Kingdom receives a massive reward. 50,000 high-quality, adult mozo bamboo stalks. In the barren mountains of the Dragon Kingdom's southwest, the landscape began to shift violently. In just 5 seconds, the wasteland was transformed into a vast sea of green bamboo. Shenyi, the Dragon Kingdom's survival expert, chimed in with his analysis. Maybe not everyone knows why Wozen is cutting this bamboo, but I have a bold guess. He's making a bow and arrows, a set of hunting weapons to dominate this place. Deep in the jungle, I finished bundling the bamboo into a massive raft. I took a deep breath and hoisted the heavy load onto my shoulder. I started trekking back toward my shelter, one grueling step at a time. As I walked, I mentally mapped out the designs for various traps. Suddenly, a violent, powerful roar echoed from the depths of the forest. That damn bear again. Holy crap, did you guys hear that? The sound waves practically hit me through the screen. It can't be far from Wozen. He's finished. If it corners him, there's no escape. I heard the gut-wrenching roar, but I barely even paused. I turned my head slightly, ears twitching to track its position. A direct confrontation right now would be idiocy. But in the future, that bear's hide will make the best armor. Its gallbladder is priceless for medicine, and its meat is a massive energy source. To me, that beast was nothing more than a walking treasure chest. I didn't hesitate. I tightened my grip on the bamboo and hurried back to camp. I didn't even think about resting. I grabbed my shovel and started sharpening the stalks. I fashioned over 10 razor-sharp bamboo stakes, the most common and lethal hunting trap. In the live chat, viewers stared at the screen with their jaws on the floor. Holy mother of, what is Wozen doing? Why does he need that many spears? I don't know why, but I have a bad feeling about those things. Don't tell me those are for the bear. I used vines to bundle the dozen steaks I had prepared. I wrapped my leftover roasted fish and chicken in large leaves. I grabbed my shovel and carefully ventured back into the woods. Your easy life is over, bear. A pungent, nauseating stench of rot and urine hit my nose, and I found fresh bear droppings on the trail. After checking the area for danger, I raised my shovel and started digging a massive hole. 2.5 hours later, I finished a pit 2 meters deep and over 2 meters wide. I placed the sharpened bamboo stakes one by one, driving them firmly into the bottom of the pit. I thought, hey little bear, you better enjoy the mansion I built for you. I began covering the trap with branches and dry leaves to camouflage it. From a distance, it looked like solid ground. No one would guess a death trap lay beneath. As the sun began to set, I headed to the stream to fill my pot with water. I gathered some firewood and returned to the cave for a bite of chicken and a sip of tea. The herbs were aromatic, but without salt, the food lacked soul. The massive amount of sweat I lost digging that trap was finally taking its toll on my body. Tomorrow, I have to find salt no matter what, but even after eating my fill, I didn't stop to rest. I kept carving bamboo until the sudden, low rumble of thunder echoed through the trees. Then came the rain, heavy drops slamming into the dirt outside the cave. Safe inside my shelter, I set up a simple alert system and finally fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, the first thing I did was head out to check the trap. But just as I finished packing my gear, a cold, mechanical voice broadcasted a global announcement. 1,000 supply crates are being airdropped across the continent, containing food, medicine, and even firearms. Guns. This isn't just survival anymore. They're trying to force us into a bloodbath. The people from the Eagle Nation must be losing their minds with joy right now. Out of their 100 contestants, at least 30 are retired Delta Force operators. Give those men a rifle, and they'll turn this wilderness into a slaughterhouse. The viewers back home grew worried for the Dragon Nation as all eyes turned to my screen. I heard the announcement, but I only gave a slight, disinterested frown. I had more important things to do, so I kept walking toward my trap. It took me over half an hour to reach the spot where I'd spent all that time digging. From a distance, the faint metallic scent of blood hit me. Did I catch the bear? I gripped my spear tight and crept forward, seeing the ground around the pit torn to shreds. I ran to the edge and looked down, but it wasn't a bear inside. It was a massive red deer. It must have panicked during last night's storm and taken a fatal wrong step. It wasn't the bear, but this deer weighed at least 150 kilos. I just hit the jackpot. I captured a massive prize, a deer, triggering a reward of 10,000 more for my people. The entire Dragon Nation erupted in joy as the announcement hit the central plaza. One after another, robust and healthy deer began pouring out of the light portal like rain. The sight of 10,000 deer charging through the streets was nothing short of spectacular. For a brief moment, the world seemed to stand still. Then, the shock wore off and the entire nation surged toward the land. A massive, collective cheer broke out across the country. The sound was absolutely deafening. The comments went wild. God Wozen. From now on, he's my only god. 10,000 deer? That's insane. I stood at the edge of the pit, took a quick look, and jumped down. I landed right inside the trap next to the carcass. With my first precise cut, I opened the main artery in the neck to drain the blood. I started butchering the body, dismantling the 300-pound beast into 8 pieces in the blink of an eye. I grabbed the tenderest loin and a rack of ribs, wrapped them up, and threw the heaviest hind leg over my shoulder. I thought, I need to get this meat to the cave before other predators catch the scent. I climbed out and didn't waste a single second, reaching the cave 10 minutes later. I knew the rest of that meat had to be moved as soon as possible. But less than 100 yards from my trap, an impossibly large brown bear poked its head through the brush. Standing on its hind legs, the monster easily cleared 10 feet in height. Its Its brown fur stood on end, looking as sharp and deadly as steel needles. The most terrifying part was its eyes, completely devoid of emotion. It watched my silhouette as I walked away, its massive claws restlessly scratching the ground. 20 minutes later, I reappeared at the edge of the trap. Suddenly, I spotted massive bear tracks pressed deep into the mud. A chill ran through me from head to toe in an instant. That thing was just here, and it might still be close. I thought, you dare steal from me? I'm going to rip that skin right off your back. Back at the cave, the deer leg lay still on the cold stone slab, but I had no appetite. The more I waited, the more my blood began to boil. Taking a step back only made me feel like I was losing even more ground. So, without looking back, I marched out of the cave. I decided to change course and head into an unexplored zone to try my luck. After trekking for about a kilometer, I suddenly came to a halt. 50 yards ahead to the left, I saw it, the exact mulberry tree I had been searching for. With my bow, my arrows, and now a string made of mulberry bark, I'd be ready. That bear and I are going to settle the score. Thinking of this, I immediately pulled out my entrenching shovel. Carefully, I peeled the bark from the mulberry tree and gathered 2 bundles. This would be more than enough for what I had planned. Once I got back, the real crafting would begin. I had the materials for my bowstring, so I threw on my backpack, feeling satisfied. I prepared to keep exploring the area. Suddenly, I felt a soft tap that made my heart skip a beat. Something touched my right shoulder, delicate and warm, like a human hand. I thought, who the hell is there? My survival instincts kicked in instantly. I gripped my entrenching shovel and swung it behind me in one fluid motion. But there was absolutely nothing behind me until I heard a monkey's screech from above. I looked up and saw a monkey hanging from a branch, grinning at me. It mocked me shamelessly and tried to snatch the backpack right off my shoulders. That was the final straw. First a bear steals my meat, and now this? Even a damn monkey thinks it can play games with me? In the wild, mercy is just self-cruelty. I tightened my grip on the shovel, and a second later, the monkey's death scream echoed through the woods. I didn't even glance at the carcass. I had no interest in that kind of meat. Right then, the global livestream chat exploded. Quick, go check the Indian contestant. This guy is insane. On the other screen, a heavily bearded contestant from India named Kumar was standing still. In front of him sat a freshly opened supply crate filled with first aid kits and compressed biscuits. But what caught everyone's eye was the massive lizard, over a meter long, struggling in his hands. Kumar had incredible luck, finding an airdrop and catching a fresh meal at the same time. But as the world watched, Kumar suddenly looked at the lizard and flashed a smile full of pure malice. Suddenly, the screen went black as a system notification popped up. Contestant has disabled the stream. It would reactivate in 2 hours, leaving the world in a stunned, uneasy silence. I kept moving through the unknown, scanning the horizon for anything out of the ordinary. I spotted a swamp about 100 meters ahead and immediately changed direction to go around it. Soon, I noticed a massive amount of animal droppings covering the ground. This was clearly a gathering point or a daily migration route for the local wildlife. I gripped my spear tightly and melted into the tall grass, staying low. In the center of a clearing ahead, a small deer was licking a strange, grayish-white rock. My eyes sharpened instantly as I realized what it was, a salt mine. My body had been screaming for salt lately, and now, a literal treasure was sitting right in front of me. I want that mine, and I want that deer too. I crouched low and crept toward the deer, waiting for the perfect window to strike. When the moment came, I launched my spear with lethal precision. The spear flew through the air and pierced the deer's hindquarters. The small deer panicked and tried to bolt, but it collapsed after only a few desperate steps. I approached and pulled out my spear, but I didn't start butchering the animal immediately. Instead, I turned to the rock and used my entrenching shovel to pry off a chunk. I gave it a quick lick. It was definitely high-quality rock salt. With this salt, I can finally cure meat and preserve my food for the long term. More importantly, my physical energy will finally recover to its absolute peak. Resource obtained, wild deer. The Dragon Nation receives 10,000 wild deer. I spent the next several hours striking the salt mine with all my strength. Every shovel strike made the base of my thumb tremble and go numb. I filled almost half my backpack before finally stopping. Today's haul, a 50-pound deer and over 20 pounds of coarse salt. The walk back to camp felt much lighter despite the weight. Suddenly, a blood-red system notification flashed. Jack from the Lighthouse Nation has eliminated Pedro. I muttered to myself, so, someone finally made a move. Jack was a member of the Navy SEALs, the pride of the Lighthouse Nation, a veteran of the Elite Team 6. He was a top-tier operator, a true elite soldier, a specialist in special forces operations. He was an expert in jungle warfare, a natural-born assassin. To him, this wilderness wasn't a survival test, it was a hunting ground. The nature of this game just changed. Everyone here is now either a hunter or prey. Back in the cave, I placed a chunk of rock salt onto a flat stone. I lifted another heavy rock and brought it crashing down to crush the salt. I kept striking the rock until the salt broke into pea-sized chunks. A small pile of rock salt fragments sat before me, ready for purification. This process improves the flavor and removes dangerous heavy metals. I started heating the water to make sure the salt would dissolve properly. I poured the salt chunks into the water. I stirred the iron pot constantly as the heat rose. Once it dissolved, I pulled an empty bamboo tube from my backpack. I layered it with fine sand from the cave entrance and ash from the fire. Finally, I added a layer of charcoal. Just like that, I had a makeshift filter ready to go. I filtered the salt water 3 times before pouring the clean liquid back into the pot to evaporate. After 2 hours of boiling, pure white crystals began to form at the bottom. When that layer of snow-white salt finally appeared, the live chat exploded. No way, he actually did it. That salt looks cleaner than the store-bought stuff. I didn't stop there. I repeated the entire process. I followed the exact same purification steps. I ran the cycle twice more. I didn't quit until the bamboo tube was completely filled with white gold. Suddenly, my stomach let out a loud growl of protest. It was time to eat. I grabbed the deer leg and used my trench shovel to carve deep slits into the meat. I rubbed the freshly purified salt deep into the meat. About half an hour later, the deer leg was finally roasted to perfection. I took a massive bite and nodded in satisfaction. Absolutely delicious. I didn't rest after finishing my meal. Instead, I started working on the bowstring. Mulberry bark fiber is incredibly tough and flexible, the perfect material for a string. I tore the bark into thin strips and began braiding them together. Once the string was ready, I pulled out the bamboo I had cut earlier. I shaped the bow's body until a perfect, handmade bamboo bow sat in my hands. Next, I used thinner bamboo stalks to craft the arrow shafts. I used the pheasant feathers I collected earlier to fletch them. Mission accomplished. Now that I have this bow, things are going to change. It's time to settle the score with that bear that stole my meat. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the cave entrance. Today marks the 3rd day, and I wonder what reward the system has for me. A notification appeared. Host has survived 3 consecutive days in the wild. Conditions for check-in met. Would you like to check in now? I thought check in and immediately cut the live stream feed. If the system gives me something, I can't let the viewers see it. I waited for the reward to manifest. The crystal clear image of the live stream suddenly cut to black. Over 1 billion viewers lost their minds instantly, flooding the chat with panic. What happened? Where's Godwa? Why did the screen go dark? The survival expert stroked his chin and tried to calm the audience. I suspect he's crafting a decisive tool or a secret trap he doesn't want us to see. A message flashed in my mind. Check-in successful. Reward obtained. A Helislayer pistol with 30 rounds of ammunition. With my bow and arrows, I felt like I had finally entered the age of cold steel. But with this pistol, I just took a massive leap straight into modern warfare. Now, how do I explain this? I can't just turn the stream back on and tell them I made it. Did I make a gun out of bamboo and vines? No one would buy that. I'll just have to claim it was an old supply drop I stumbled upon. I shoved the magazine and the pistol deep into my backpack before restarting the stream. I grabbed my handmade bow in one hand and my sharpened spear in the other. I stepped out of the cave fully armed, and the viewers realized I was heading for the trap. No way. Is he really going to face that massive bear with just a bow? The host's expression turned serious as she watched me approach the danger zone. Unless I hit a vital spot like the eyes, the consequences of this fight will be disastrous. But I remained strangely calm as I reached the trap the grizzly had destroyed. The dirt around the pit was still loose, clearly showing the marks of those massive claws. I wasn't nervous, and I didn't rush into action. Instead, I started resetting the trap, rearranging the sharp bamboo stakes I dug up yesterday. I camouflaged the opening perfectly with loose soil and leaves. Then, I tossed the bloody venison right on top of the pit. With the setup complete, I picked a massive tree with a perfect vantage point and climbed up. I drew my bowstring and aimed at the hidden trap below. Everything was ready. I became the ultimate patient hunter, melting into the environment. I waited in silence for that bear to let its hunger lead it into the hole. I thought to myself, hey big guy, lunch is served. Let's see if you're brave enough to take it. During the long wait, I didn't move a single muscle. To kill the time, I opened the system screen and watched the information feed update. Bruce from the Lighthouse Nation successfully triggered a supply drop and obtained a compound crossbow. Meanwhile, Raji from the Indian Nation accidentally ate a poisonous herb and died. Wang Xian from the Dragon Nation found iron ore, adding a new open-pit mine to our national territory. Right now, everyone is stuck with wooden weapons, so exploration is clearly the key. Smelting or to forge weapons of war is the only way to progress in the long run. I need to handle this bear quickly and stockpile food. Then, I'll find a supply drop to legalize the origin of my pistol. While I waited, an agile figure was moving silently through another part of the forest. They slipped between the trees like a ghost, watching the shadows. It was the Special Forces soldier, Len Yusuf. The popularity of her stream was absolutely skyrocketing. Countless viewers followed her perspective, watching her every move. She was performing a textbook jungle infiltration. Suddenly, Len stopped dead in her tracks. She found a small piece of scraped bamboo bark and examined it carefully. Then she turned her gaze toward a cave not far away. She didn't rush in, choosing to scout the perimeter of the cave first. Soon, more traces of human presence appeared before her eyes. Tree stumps cut with a sharp tool and bloodstains from cleaned game. She finally reached the cave entrance and found the remains of a campfire. The embers were still radiating heat. All the details clicked together, forming a clear picture in her mind. A formidable individual with extraordinary skills had already secured food, fire, and salt. The chat exploded. No way, it's God Wozen's home. They're like long-lost teammates. In the Dragon Nation's high command, everyone stood up in excitement. They desperately wanted Lin to meet up with me. If we joined forces, our nation's chances of winning would be infinite. But they could only watch as Lin observed the cave entrance for 5 minutes. Finally, she decided to retreat into the shadows. This territory already had an owner, and she didn't know if they were friend or foe. Barging into a powerful creature's domain is an incredibly dangerous move. She needed to find other Dragon Nation survivors who might need help. She patted her backpack, feeling the dried meat she'd prepared as hope for her future teammates. By then, I had already been perched in that tree for 4 or 5 hours. Suddenly, a strange, discordant sound echoed, the crunch of a massive body crushing dry leaves and branches. I snapped my eyes open instantly. A brown bear of exaggerated proportions emerged slowly from the depths of the dense forest. It was even fatter than I imagined, easily standing over 3 meters tall. The stream chat exploded. It's Shonda? Shonda is here. Wozen run. Arrows won't do a damn thing to that monster. Shinya's expression turned dead serious as he watched to see if my trap would work. The giant bear approached the trap step by step, lowering its head toward the tempting scent of the venison. It didn't bite, circling the trap and sniffing loudly as if it knew the meal was a setup. Time ticked by second, and my heart was in my throat. I kept my deer-bone arrowhead aimed fixedly at the giant bear's eye. I was waiting for the perfect moment. Either the bear would lose its patience and fall into the trap, or it would expose a single weak point. The bear circled the trap 3 times, but its next move left me and millions of viewers stunned. The massive bear didn't charge recklessly or try to test the ground. Instead, it walked carefully to the edge and lowered itself in like a human. Its enormous body perfectly avoided every single sharpened bamboo stake. The camouflage and the venison fell right in with it as it stole the meal without a scratch. Is this thing really a bear? It's smarter than Shonda and Shoner combined. The Dragon Nation stream chat went absolutely ballistic, stunned by the beast's intelligence. Up in the tree, the veins in my hand bulged as I gripped my bow. I had prepared for 1,000 possibilities, but never this one. The giant bear grabbed the meat in its jaws and prepared to climb out of the pit. Millions of viewers held their breath as a cold smile played on my lips. I waited for the exact moment its head peeked over the edge of the trap. The whistle of my arrow tore through the deathly silence of the forest. It struck the bear's forehead with precision, but the bone tip couldn't pierce that thick skull. However, the sheer force of the impact was enough to daze the monster. The bear lost its footing and fell backward into the pit once more. The sickening sound of sharpened stakes piercing heavy flesh echoed through the clearing. Finally, the trap I built was doing its job. A heartbreaking, furious roar erupted from the hole. The sound was so powerful it seemed to shake the very sky above me. The forest trembled, and thousands of terrified birds took flight all at once. Fine beads of sweat began to purl across my forehead. I didn't dare lower my guard for even a single second. I immediately drew a second arrow from my back, ready to unleash a ruthless barrage if that head popped up again. Inside the trap, the giant bear's roars were becoming increasingly violent. It was pure, unadulterated rage. Enormous claws lashed out chaotically against the narrow floor of the pit. Soon, a thick cloud of dust billowed out from the trap and obscured everything. My vision was cut off instantly, and I realized this bear is actually quite clever. I held my breath, listening intently to every movement coming from below. Amidst the dust, the thrashing gradually stopped and was replaced by the sound of scraping earth. It's climbing, I thought, as I pulled my bowstring even tighter. Suddenly, a massive dark silhouette began to ascend slowly. But this time it kept its back to me, and I couldn't help but curse the beast's combat intelligence. This went beyond wild instinct. After taking one arrow, it knew exactly where the threat was. It had already found the optimal strategy to counter me. Whoosh! I let the second arrow fly. That sharpened deer-bone tip whistled through the air and slammed into the bear's back. It bounced right off without leaving so much as a scratch on its thick fur. Bad sign, I thought, reaching for a third arrow just as the giant forced its way out of the pit. Its eyes locked onto mine as I sat perched high up toward the sky. I was perched high up in that tree. The next second, that beast transformed into a living weapon. A tank completely out of control. It charged head-on into the massive trunk. It's over, I thought. This is the end. The impact was deafening. How is he supposed to survive this? There was nowhere left to run. I can't bear to watch. Someone needs to save Wozen right now. I'm going to die. There's no other way out. The force of that bear's charge is terrifying. Even with a lifetime of knowledge, I couldn't imagine a single way for a human to survive this. The giant bear slammed its body violently against the ancient tree again. The wood groaned under the pressure. A second impact followed immediately after. The entire structure shuddered. A massive crack spread rapidly through the center of the trunk, and just as it began to collapse, I moved. I gripped my wooden spear with both hands, and I leaped straight down toward the giant bear below. No way, he's gone crazy. Everyone thought I had given up, but then they witnessed a scene they'd never forget. I was like a human cannonball screaming down from the sky. In that instant, time seemed to stand still. For the first time, pure terror flashed in the giant bear's eyes. The spearhead sank deep into the beast's skull. The monster finally collapsed, spasmed twice, and then went completely still. A deathly silence fell over the Dragon Kingdom's broadcast channel. Tens of millions of viewers sat there, frozen in shock for over 10 seconds. Holy hell, what just happened? Was that a miracle? It had to be a miracle. I was a total beast. That maneuver was on a whole different level. Back in the studio, someone slammed the table, their face flushed with pure adrenaline. Incredible. Wozen is absolutely invincible. The Dragon Kingdom contestant has successfully hunted a hero-tier bear. 10,000 hero bears will now be added to the national territory. They began appearing across the Dragon Kingdom's virgin forests and nature reserves. One after another, the notifications rolled in. Gigantic bears of massive proportions were manifesting out of thin air. The world outside was in an absolute uproar. Unaware of the chaos, I pulled the entrenching shovel from my belt. I used the blade to open the bear's abdomen and located the dark green gallbladder. I wrapped it in a clean leaf, stowed it in my pack, and began the grueling task of skinning the hide. I took the 4 best ribs and a large piece of loin, wrapping them in the prepared bear skin. Once finished, I hoisted the heavy bundle of meat onto my shoulder and searched for a clearing. I had only taken a few steps when a familiar scent hit my nose. Wild scallions. My eyes lit up as I followed the aroma. Not far away, on a gentle slope, a patch of wild scallions was growing thick. I swallowed hard, realizing I hadn't eaten in 10 hours and had just survived a life-or-death struggle. Seeing those greens was like finding the world's greatest delicacy, so I rushed over and plucked a dozen. With these treasures, tonight's bear meat feast was going to be perfect. I found a flat spot nearby and immediately started a campfire. I placed the bear loin on a flat stone and used my shovel to slice it into thick pieces. The surface of the meat slowly turned a tempting, golden brown color. It looked like honey-glazed perfection. I took a bite and let it melt in my mouth. It was a feast fit for the gods. The meat was delicious but incredibly fatty, so it was time for the scallions to balance it out. I took a huge bite of a scallion, letting the spicy juice flood my mouth before taking another piece of meat. This was on a whole different level. The combination was flawless. Once I find a place for a permanent shelter, I'll have to add distilling alcohol to my plans. Roasted meat and a strong drink. Now that would be the life. But as I was immersed in my meal, I caught sight of a strange column of smoke rising in the distance. An air supply drop. I reacted instantly, a spark of excitement flashing in my eyes. I quickly gauged the distance. It was about 20 kilometers away, deep in the dense forest. At my current pace, it would take a full day to reach, so there was no point in rushing. First, I needed to finish filling my stomach. In another part of the forest, closer to the drop zone, Linyu was also on the move. He had spotted that column of red smoke. As a professional special forces soldier, he knew the value of an air supply crate better than anyone. Weapons, gear, medical supplies, or military rations, any of those could drastically boost his survival odds. Judging by the terrain, that location had to be a relatively open valley. Even though the flat ground was perfect for a landing zone, it also meant there was zero cover, making it easy to be exposed. He knew the risks were high. Linyu mentally weighed the pros and cons. The drop point would inevitably attract a swarm of other contestants. When that happened, a brutal battle would be unavoidable. He was alone, and his chances of winning weren't exactly high. But he didn't have another choice. He had to secure more resources for his country. Linyu did a final check of his equipment. A military dagger, a handmade bow with arrows, and a few pieces of dried meat, plus a single bottle of water. He took a deep breath and headed straight toward the airdrop. No way. The goddess of light. Linyu saw the supply drop too. Now we can finally reach a total of 25 minutes. Ow. Things are about to get real. This is going to be good. God Wu and the goddess. Will they actually meet at the drop site? At the delivery point? Please, just team up already. It was time. I wrapped a portion of the bear meat in large leaves and tucked it into the bottom. I shoved it deep into my backpack, but it was just too small. I had to toss most of the meat. Dozens of kilos of bear meat. This stuff is life-saving in the wild, but one man can only carry so much. I couldn't take it all, so I started trekking with long strides toward the red smoke. On a hillside closer to the drop zone, Matsushita gave his partner a kiss. Did you see that, honey? The bastard smirked, showing off his white teeth. Of course, my wild kitten. We have to get it. They had to secure that airdrop no matter what, and both geared up to move in fast. Streaming rooms, all over the world, are absolutely exploding right now. This is about to become a massive problem. A total free-for-all battle is coming. And those 2 Japanese dogs are still acting all lovey-dovey. They make me sick, and they have the numbers advantage. I moved quickly through the dense edge of the forest. Between the bear meat, the hide, and my gear, I was hauling at least 60 kilos. My shoulders burned, and my pace began to slow down. Right then, that familiar system notification echoed inside my head. Special mineral resource detected nearby. I followed the pull of my environmental perception. A natural rock wall loomed right in front of me. Holy hell, a natural gold mine, the strongest currency in the modern world. I pulled out my entrenching shovel and slammed it against the rock. A clear, metallic ring echoed as I dug in with everything I had. I managed to unearth over 10 chunks of ore, with an incredibly high gold content. Dragon Kingdom contestant, Wozen, has discovered a gold mine. Reward, 10,000 grams. Massive minds. The entire dragon kingdom erupted in joy instantly as small hills rose from the earth across the country. One after another, they burst through the soil. They were transforming into actual gold mines. After packing away all the ore, I threw my backpack back on and pushed toward the extraction point, knowing the others were rushing there blindly too. I have to hurry. But in less than half an hour, the sky shifted without warning as dark clouds swirled above. They churned violently, and immediately after, a dense, heavy hail began to plummet. In the emergency, I yanked out my iron pot and, without a second thought, I slammed it onto my head. But every hailstone that hit me hurt like hell, leaving my back and arms covered in bruises. I sprinted at full speed with the pot as my only shield, desperately searching for any kind of shelter. Finally, I spotted a cave not far away at the foot of a cliff. What kind of hellish weather is this? Deep in the tense forest, Atsushita and Kobasai from Japan were running for their lives, trying to protect their heads. Even though they hid under a massive tree, the leaves couldn't stop the hail, leaving their faces swollen and purple. Meanwhile, the American contestant had just reached a clearing with absolutely nothing to cover himself. After just a few steps, a giant hailstone smashed into his knee. He didn't see it coming. It took him a long time before he could even stand back up. The hail slammed down near the cave entrance, and the temperature inside, it just kept dropping. I exhaled a cloud of white mist and thought, looks like I won't be leaving anytime soon. I pulled the remaining bear meat from my backpack and started prepping it. I needed to start a fire to warm up, but in this hellish weather, rubbing sticks together was nearly impossible. After half an hour of struggling, I still had nothing, and I realized I desperately needed a lighter. Just as I was about to take a break, I heard footsteps outside. I spun around toward the entrance and gripped my trench shovel in silence. Through the thick curtain of hail, a silhouette emerged, growing sharper as it approached. It was a man of average build carrying a bulging backpack. I wondered which country he was from as he stopped 3 meters away, looking absolutely panicked when he saw me on guard. He threw his hands up instantly, making me think, no way, is this guy French? Seeing that I didn't attack immediately, he relaxed slightly. Slowly, he pushed his backpack across the ground toward me, saying he just wanted shelter and was willing to share all his tools. I didn't lower my guard for a second. In this place, every stranger is an enemy, but that stuffed backpack definitely caught my eye. He pointed at the dry wood, then at his bag, signaling he had fire, so I ordered him back 10 paces at shovel point. He obeyed meekly, retreating into the cold, and I reached down to open the bag. Inside were compressed biscuits, canned food, basic gear like ropes, a knife, and most importantly, a flint. I looked back up at the man. He was still holding that surrender pose, so I asked, "What's your name?" "Pierre Dupont," he replied. "I take it you haven't found any of your countrymen either?" I asked. "No, I've been alone this whole time," he said. "My luck was terrible. I was lost for 3 days before I found this place." Most foreign competitors form temporary teams, but they usually scatter the moment danger hits. I stared at him and asked, "So what do you want?" Pierre hesitated for a moment and pointed toward the cave. "I just want shelter from this storm. It's killing me out here." "Fine," I said, "but on my conditions." A spark of surprise crossed his eyes. "First, you do exactly what I say. Second, no personal questions. Third, if we're in danger, it's every man for himself." I didn't mind cooperating for now, but I wasn't here to make friends. In this place, you can't fully trust anyone but yourself. Pierre nodded frantically, threw his backpack over his shoulder, and ran into the cave. I told him to start a fire, using my trench shovel to dig a small pit in the ground. I gathered dry stones to line the pit, while Pierre offered me his flint and some tinder. I took the flint and used the edge of my trench shovel to strike it. I struck it against a stone and quickly covered it, and soon, a small flame pushed back the damp cold. I skewered the bear meat on a stick and set it over the fire to roast. Pierre swallowed hard. He hadn't tasted a hot meal in 2 days. I looked at him and asked, "You want some?" Pierre nodded. He was nodding frantically, his eyes full of longing, but I knew nothing in this world is free. "Give me your flint in exchange," I said. A flash of resentment crossed Pierre's eyes for a split second, but he quickly masked it and handed the flint over with both hands, saying, "Here, take it," I replied, nodding with satisfaction. I thought to myself, not a bad deal at all. Thank you so much," he stammered, taking a careful bite and immediately squinting in delight. "This is delicious," he said. "What kind of meat is this?" "Bear," I replied. Pierre's eyes widened like saucers as he froze, looking nervous. I didn't offer any more explanations. I just kept roasting my own portion. Pierre looked at me with a completely different expression now. He realized that someone capable of hunting a grizzly bear with their bare hands was a top-tier predator. Outside, the hail continued to hammer down, but inside the cave, it felt as warm as spring. Neither of us spoke, but the air was thick with the scent of meat and a strange, subtle tension. Pierre kept glancing at me out of the corner of his eye, a faint, calculating look in his gaze. "Hunting a grizzly bear is incredible. I've never seen anyone like you in my entire life." I didn't answer. I just poked at the fire with a branch. "I imagine an expert like you must have plenty of good gear on you, right?" I finally shot him a look that made his heart skip a beat. He suddenly remembered my rule, no personal questions. "We French have a saying," he stammered. "Friends should help each other. You saved me, and I assure you, I'll make it worth your while." Back in the broadcast room, the commentators had already noticed the shift. They were watching the way Pierre looked at me. This guy gives me a bad feeling, one of them remarked. He looks like a fox, planning exactly how to rob the chicken coop. Wozen better watch his back. I have a feeling this is going to end badly. The night grew deeper, and the hail outside the cave finally stopped. Pierre looked at his watch, then at me as I rested with my eyes closed. "It's late. Why aren't you asleep yet?" he asked, but I replied without even opening my eyes. "Why aren't you?" "Haha, I'm used to staying up late. You rest first. I'll keep watch and guarantee nothing happens." "I'm not sleepy," I said, my cold response cutting Pierre off mid-sentence. Inside, I called him a master of deception, but on the surface, I stayed calm. He tried to sound friendly, suggesting, "Then let's keep watch together." "Suit yourself," I replied. Time ticked by minute, and Pierre started looking more anxious. Excuse me," he stammered. "I need to go outside to relieve myself." I noticed he was grabbing all his gear just to go to the bathroom. The moment he hurried out of the cave, I stood up and kicked the fire out. I threw my pack over my shoulder and melted into the darkness without a sound. I found a rock for cover, notched an arrow, and became one with the night. Less than 10 minutes later, 2 sets of stealthy footsteps approached from afar. It was Ivan, whispering, "He's right in that cave, a lone guy with top-tier gear." "Are you sure he's alone? Did he see you?" Ivan asked. "I'm sure," Pierre insisted. "I watched him all night. He's by himself." Ivan smiled coldly and said, "We cripple him first, then take everything. And remember, leave no traces behind." The two of them lunged into the cave like hungry wolves. But inside, there was no one to be found. Only a pile of scattered, cold ashes remained. Pierre turned pale, stammering, "Impossible. He was right here." Ivan spun around and glared at him with pure hatred. "You idiot," he hissed. "He figured it out." Right at that moment, an arrow tore through the air. It slammed into Pierre, the sheer force of the impact knocking him flat. Terrified, Ivan raised his machete and scrambled back. He screamed furiously into the darkness where the shot came from. "Whoever you are, show yourself. Get out here." My answer was a second arrow that pierced his wrist instantly. His machete hit the ground with a heavy metallic clang. Ivan clutched his bleeding arm and began to howl in the night. I stepped slowly from behind the rock, my arrow already notched and aimed. I didn't say a word as I drew the string back, knowing only the strong survive. After dealing with them, I started collecting my loot while the wind carried the scent of blood. I didn't care about the smell. I had just hit the jackpot. I found ration crackers, moose, half a bottle of water, and a brand new medical kit. In the wild, a kit like this is basically a second life. I also found a Swiss Army knife, a half-dried rabbit, and a roll of nylon rope. These were the best survival items anyone could ever ask for. I packed everything useful and looked down at the 2 bodies with a frozen gaze. I thought, next time, pick your targets more carefully. Then I vanished into the night. Back in the Dragon Kingdom's broadcast room, the atmosphere was pure euphoria. Comments flooded the screen like a volcanic eruption, so thick I could barely see the footage. The hype in the studio was reaching a breaking point. Sabana slammed the table in excitement, shouting that my counterattack was a textbook masterpiece. But while my people celebrated, the global emergency conference fell into a deathly silence. The representative from Saigwa looked grim, frantically accusing the Dragon Kingdom for my actions. Our representative just sat there, completely calm and unfazed. He reminded them that these were the rules of the game they all signed up for. Realizing he couldn't win with logic, the Saigwa representative turned vicious. He threatened that in 2 days, communications between contestants would open up. He vowed to order every Saigwa survivor to hunt down our people, no matter the cost. The room turned ice cold, but our representative just let out a dry chuckle. "We'll be waiting," he said, while I moved silently through the desolate wasteland. I carried the heavy loot on my back, slipping between the shadows of the trees. The battle report of how I eliminated those 2 foreigners had already been broadcast. Deep inside a secret cave covered in vines, Manhwa was sharpening her combat knife. Suddenly, her watch vibrated, and she glanced down at the glowing screen. Her eyes narrowed the moment she read the report about my kill. "Him again," she whispered with a smirk. "Well done." She began sharpening her blade with even more intensity, refusing to be left behind. At that very same moment, the other contestants from the Dragon Kingdom saw it too. They stared at the message, feeling a surge of immense pride. A wave of courage and strength ignited a new sense of hope in every single one of their hearts. Soon after, the eastern horizon began to brighten, so I stood up and brushed off the dust. Then, I hoisted that heavy backpack onto my shoulder and began to get my bearings. I kept moving steadily toward that pillar of red smoke. My eyes were burning with unshakable determination. After several hours of intense marching, my legs felt like they weighed a ton. Every step was pure agony, and my knees even started to tremble slightly. I decided I had to stop. I needed to rest and recharge my energy using my master-level perception. I moved quickly toward the area where the air felt the most humid. Suddenly, the sound of running water reached me. I pushed the bushes aside, and a small stream appeared before my eyes. The water in the creek wasn't exactly crystal clear. It carried fine sand, mud, and dry leaves. But in this desperate situation, it was a literal fountain of life. I dropped the heavy backpack and pulled out my machete. I walked to the bank and picked a tree as thick as a dinner plate. I took a deep breath and swung hard, burying the blade halfway into the trunk. I kept swinging again and again. In less than 2 minutes, the small tree came crashing down. I started chopping it into a pile of firewood. Then, I grabbed my flint and scraped the magnesium bar. I struck the bar with the spine of my knife. A shower of sparks flew out and landed right on the dry tinder. A wisp of smoke rose, and suddenly, boom, a flame caught. Soon, a warm fire was roaring. The heat melted away my fatigue and the cold. Nothing beats the feeling of a campfire. Next, I pulled out my trench shovel to dig a filtration pit. I layered it with sand, gravel, and ash. I took the murky creek water and ran it through the filter. After a few rounds, I poured the water into my iron pot and set it over the flames to boil. Then, I pulled out that half-dried hare. The meat was as tough as a piece of wood. But to me, this was a top-tier delicacy. Bear meat is too rich if you eat it constantly, so a bit of hare was exactly what I needed. I pulled out my Swiss Army knife and sliced the meat. I cut it into small pieces with ease and skewered them onto a branch to roast over the fire. Soon, the fat began to sizzle and melt under the heat. An intense aroma of roasted meat drifted through the forest. Back in the Dragon Country live stream room, countless viewers were mesmerized by the sight. In the studio, Bingbing couldn't help but swallow hard as she watched me eat. While beside her, Chinyi maintained a serious expression. The way he's purifying water is the most classic, effective method. It's a clear display of his deep survival experience. I took a sip of the boiled water and started on the meal. The hare was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, melting away the exhaustion of a sleepless night. Once I finished the last piece of meat, I buried the campfire completely with dirt and sand. I poured water over the spot and checked it thoroughly to make sure not a single spark remained. I hoisted the heavy backpack onto my shoulders again. I felt my energy surging back into my body. I quickly identified the right direction and pushed forward toward the airdrop signal. However, I hadn't even been walking for half an hour when I stopped. My steps slowed down involuntarily as the forest fell deathly silent. Suddenly, a sharp chill ran from my feet to the top of my head. In that instant, every muscle in my body tensed up as I reached for the machete at my waist. My master-level perception scanned the area until my gaze locked onto a spot between two trees. Something was waiting for me just ahead. 10 centimeters off the ground, I spotted a thin tripwire made of animal gut. Back in the Dragon Country livestream, the chat exploded as Chunyi stared at the screen, realizing it was a trap for humans. The viewers' hearts jumped into their throats at the thought of me being hunted. But then, I made a move that no one expected. I knelt down and used my finger to draw several circles in the dirt. Within seconds, I had constructed a three-dimensional attack map. Inside my mind, analyzing every angle. Where would the attack come from once the trap was sprung? I identified 2 perfect ambush points nearby and let a cold smile play on my lips. I backed away silently and let my figure melt into the shadows. I reached back and grabbed my handmade longbow, knocking an arrow. Meanwhile, at the ambush point, 2 contestants from Guaston lay crouched in wait. Aobi Saishir frowned at the spot where I had vanished, wondering if I had seen them. Beside him, Matsushita Suza whispered that the tripwire was an ancient Gua technique. He insisted it was impossible for me to have seen it and told Aobi Saishir to wait. Aobi Saishir calmed down and licked his dry lips, his eyes filled with pure greed. But as the minutes ticked by, there was no movement near the trap. Their patience was wearing thin when a sudden rustle came from the nearby bushes. Aobi Saishir flinched and aimed his weapon sharply toward the sound. A wild rabbit darted out from the brush and scurried away. Aobi Saishir let out a long sigh of relief. But in the next second, a shadow emerged from the distance. An arrow whistled through the air and pierced Aobi Saishir's wrist with surgical precision. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the entire forest. Matsushita Suza immediately rolled for cover, gripping his knife and scanning the area. I stepped out from the trees, walking calmly with my bow in hand. I looked at them with a gaze so cold it was as if I were staring at 2 corpses. The overwhelming pressure I radiated made Matsushita Suza choke on his own breath. "Who the hell are you?" he stammered, but I didn't give him an answer. I simply raised my bow and took aim at his chest. Desperate, Matsushita Suza flicked his wrist, launching 3 sharpened stones at me. He followed the projectiles, lunging forward with his knife to close the gap. I tilted my body just an inch, letting the stones whistle past before I made my move. In an instant, I tensed my leg muscles. I drew the bowstring back to its absolute limit. Then, I let the arrow fly. Watching the recording later, I realized the footage didn't capture the true speed. It was faster than anything I'd done before. Matsushita Suza threw himself to the side, barely managing to dodge the projectile. But the arrow was aimed at the immobilized Aobi Saishir, piercing his head before he could even blink. Witnessing the brutal execution, Matsushita Suza froze in place. He was deeply shaken, but I didn't give him a second to breathe. I was already charging at him, swinging my sapper shovel toward his skull. Matsushita Suza reacted instinctively, raising his knife to block the strike. The shovel and the blade collided, sending a shower of sparks into the air. I felt the impact vibrate through my arms. A split second later, a massive force surged through his blade and into his hand. The skin between his thumb and index finger tore instantly, spraying blood. The sheer brute force sent him stumbling back 2 steps before he could stabilize. His eyes widened with pure shock as he stared at me. He must have been thinking, is this Dragon Country quartermaster a monster? But I wasn't finished with him yet. I didn't hesitate for a second after that first strike. I swung my sapper shovel again, the metal gleaming with a cold edge. I threw my entire weight into the blow. Matsushita Asuza grit his teeth in desperation. He threw his arm up with everything he had left. He was trying anything to block the incoming execution. But in an instant, he felt a sharp, sickening crack. The pain in his shattered bones was unlike anything he'd ever felt. Matsushita Asuza was sent flying, slamming hard against a tree. I closed the gap like a shadow, raised my shovel, and brought it down with lethal force. I aimed straight for his skull, but a kilometer away, someone else was watching. Lung Yu heard the scream and stopped dead in her tracks, pinpointing the sound. Instead of rushing in blindly like an amateur, Lung Yu suppressed her presence entirely and crept toward the source. She moved silently through the undergrowth toward the noise. A moment later, Lung Yu took cover behind a massive trunk. She hid behind a towering, mud-caked tree. She stayed hidden in the shadows. Just as she prepared to scout the situation, she saw it. A pitch-black arrow shot out from behind her. Lung Yu rolled instinctively toward a nearby wreck, but the arrow found its mark, sinking deep. It pierced her thigh, and an unbearable pain exploded instantly as she let out a muffled groan. Blood quickly stained her combat pants red, but she forced herself to roll again despite the agony. She dove into the thick bushes and drew her dagger. Her eyes locked onto the direction the attack had come from. Footsteps approached, and a tall Caucasian figure appeared with a smirk. Wow, the little kitten has fast reactions, but she was still a bit too slow. Two other burly men followed behind him, the three contenders from the lighthouse. The leader didn't rush the kill, instead staring at the blood trail on the ground with a sinister grin. Let's have some fun with you first, he said as the three dispersed with perfect coordination. They formed a standard tactical search triangle. They began to methodically close in on the area. They were surrounding the spot where Lung Yu was hiding. Meanwhile, deep in the heart of the forest, I was busy looting the gear from the fallen players. I didn't leave a single useful item behind. Right then, two world announcements blared out. I had just eliminated 2 players from BOGO in rapid succession. The BOGO team was reeling. My livestream chat exploded with hype, while the BOGO channel went dead silent. I scavenged every usable blade from the corpses, along with a dagger and half a canteen. I didn't waste another second. Without looking back, I sprinted toward the drop site. After 30 minutes of trekking through the brush, I finally reached my destination. A massive metal crate sat waiting in a clearing at the edge of the woods. I didn't rush in, scanning the perimeter for any signs of an ambush. Once I was sure it was clear, I calmly spoke 2 words. End stream. The light on my watch died instantly. Across the globe, billions of screens flickered and went pitch black. Why did I shut them out now? The world was dying to know what I was doing. But I ignored the chaos of the outside world. My focus was entirely on the prize in front of me. I slowly pried open the heavy supply crate. Inside, several vacuum-sealed bags were waiting for me. Inside were high-yield, cold-resistant potatoes. There was drought-resistant corn and high-protein soybeans. Beyond the seeds, I found a top-tier military medical kit. I pulled out a heavy-duty multi-tool. Then, I found a solar charging panel no bigger than my palm. My eyes lit up at the sight of it all. Stable food seeds are worth more than any territory in this world. I kept that thought firmly in the back of my mind. I quickly stuffed the supplies into my pockets. Everything else went straight into my backpack. Then, I made a move. I pulled an M1911 pistol from my bag. I grabbed 2 full magazines to go with it. I placed the weapon and the ammo inside the crate. The massive metal container was now completely empty otherwise. The system confirmed the transfer was complete. I prepared to restart the stream, but my body suddenly went on high alert. I felt a crowd approaching, and my gaze turned to ice. In a heartbeat, I vanished behind a massive tree. Moments later, footsteps and voices echoed through the woods. 3 Denigo players stepped into the clearing. They were dragging someone along with them. It was Lung Yu, and he was badly wounded. The leader of the Denigo group glanced toward the supply crate. He flashed a mocking grin and shouted, "Come out, mushroom friend. I know you're here. If you don't want anything to happen to your partner, you'll hand over everything in that crate right now." I didn't move a muscle, quickly analyzing the situation. 3 enemies, fully armed. 2 had high-grade compound crossbows and backup recurve bows. The third was a massive guy wielding a heavy battle axe. As for Lung Yu, he was already out of the fight. The odds of winning a direct confrontation were slim, and seeing no response, Kane lost his patience and signaled the big guy. The brute grinned maliciously and pressed his axe against Lung Yu's neck. I slowly stepped out from behind the tree with my hands up, wearing a nervous expression. "Don't hurt him," I pleaded. "Everything is in the crate, just take it." Kane smiled with satisfaction. "That's more like it. Open it up, and let's see the treasures you found." I walked slowly toward the metal crate and knelt down, pretending to struggle with the lid. Kane didn't notice my hand slipping inside the crate. He just barked, "Hurry up." I whispered back, "Almost there." In a flash, I pulled my hand out. I was holding a pistol. I spun around with explosive speed. Without a second thought, I squeezed the trigger, and 2 shots thundered through the trees. The 2 men standing guard were caught completely off guard. Both of Kane's backups dropped to the ground instantly. Kane's face twisted into pure panic. He never imagined I'd be packing heat. By instinct, he tried to raise his compound crossbow to fire back, but I was faster. I pulled the trigger twice more. One bullet shattered his crossbow, and the other buried itself in his shoulder. Cain let out a guttural scream and fled into the deep woods, stumbling and crawling away. Silence returned to the forest as I holstered the gun and rushed over to Lung Yu. I pulled out my dagger and sliced through the ropes. Lung Yu leaned against a tree trunk, clutching his leg. The bleeding wouldn't stop, and he looked at me with a mix of shock and gratitude. Meanwhile, the global live stream was in total chaos. Everyone assumed the pistol had come from an airdrop. The mood in the lighthouse was like a celebration, while Tahu was dead silent. I let out a small smile as Lung Yu spoke in a raspy voice. "Thank you," he whispered. I nodded and knelt down beside him. I reached into my backpack and pulled out a military-grade first aid kit. I snapped it open. The kit was fully stocked with everything I needed. I grabbed the surgical scissors and carefully cut the fabric away from the wound. I held Lung Yu's leg firmly with my left hand to keep him steady. With my right hand, I gripped the shaft of the arrow. In one swift motion, I ripped it out completely. Blood sprayed instantly. Lung Yu clenched his jaw as cold sweat poured down his forehead. Without flinching, I moved fast to disinfect the open wound. Then I pulled out a needle and thread to begin stitching him up. Every single movement I made was textbook perfect. Watching me work, Lung Yu couldn't help but ask a question. "Just who are you?" I didn't even look up, focusing entirely on the stitches. "The girl from the mushroom house drowned. My data is on this watch." Hearing my cold tone, Lung Yu stopped pushing for answers. He understood I didn't want to talk about the past. In no time at all, I had the wound completely sewn shut. Lung Yu looked at me with a deadly serious expression. "I'll remember this favor," he said firmly. I packed the medical kit away and stood up. "As long as you're alive, Manhwa has hope. For now, we're just 2 numbers on a list." I turned away and began scavenging the area for supplies. I stripped the useful gear off the corpses on the battlefield. I grabbed a tactical vest and strapped it on. I took a compound crossbow and a quiver full of carbon fiber arrows. Once I finished packing everything of value, I reached out and offered my hand to help Lung Yu off the ground. "They'll be back with reinforcements soon. We can't stay here." Lung Yu nodded and gripped my hand to pull himself up. He leaned on me immediately to steady himself. I looked toward the distant mountains and said, "We're finding a new home for the Longwa survivors." Meanwhile, deep in the night, a figure fled through the woods. Cain ran like a madman, the unbearable pain in his shoulder nearly making him black out. The scene from the battle played over and over in his head. He couldn't shake the image of his defeat. Fear gripped him instantly, but that fear was quickly replaced by humiliation and pure rage. "Xiao, I swear I'll make you pay 1,000 times over," he hissed. He picked up the pace, desperate to get this intel back to his superiors. He planned to return with the full might of the Dena nation to tear me apart. A cold wind whipped through the trees as I helped Lung Yu deeper into the mountains. The forest grew wilder and more untamed with every step. The canopy thickened, and the light began to fade into total darkness. I carried Lung Yu's weight while using my master-level perception to scout the area. I stopped under a massive, ancient tree and decided we'd spend the night there. I began unpacking our gear to set up camp. I spread the massive bear skin on the ground to block out the dampness. Then, I reached into my backpack. I pulled out our weapons and the rest of our survival supplies. I pulled out a dazzling variety of high-end supplies. Lung Yu stood there with his jaw dropped at the sheer amount of gear. He used to think he was Longwa's strongest player, but next to me, he felt like a child playing house. I didn't waste a second. I began sorting and organizing everything into piles. I kept the weapons within arm's reach and packed the rest into 3 separate bags so we could move at a moment's notice. Once finished, I grabbed the camping pot, 2 canteens, a flint, and a dagger. I handed them to Lung Yu and said, "Get a fire going to keep us warm while I find water and food." I told him his wound needed cleaning and warned him to stay alert before I vanished into the shadows. I made sure not to stray too far from the campsite. Instead, I activated my master level environmental perception to scan for life. I focused on every vibration in the surroundings. I detected the faint, rhythmic sound of a stream flowing to the west. 10 minutes later, a creek of crystal-clear water appeared before me. I knelt down, scooped some up, and confirmed it was safe to drink. There was no strange smell, so I pulled out the canteens to fill them up. Suddenly, a buzzing sound caught my attention, and I followed it to a honeycomb hanging from a tree. The thought hit me instantly that honey could provide a massive sugar boost. With that in mind, I quickly scanned my surroundings. My eyes locked onto some mugwort bushes and a pile of dry branches. A plan formed in my head immediately. I walked over to the mugwort, tore off the leaves, and gathered a bundle of the dry wood. I headed back to my spot and pulled out the flint. With a sharp flick, a spark landed directly on the dry branches. In an instant, the flames roared to life. I waited until the fire settled into red-hot embers before smothering them with the mugwort. Moments later, a thick, white smoke began to billow out. I quickly grabbed some large tree leaves and wrapped the mugwort tightly, leaving only a small opening for the smoke. In the Longwa broadcast studio, Chunyi adjusted his glasses, noting that my smoking technique was flawless. On the screen, I could be seen approaching the honeycomb with my smoking torch in hand. The thick, pungent smoke from the torch was incredibly strong. The bees couldn't stand it for a second. The honeycomb erupted as countless wild bees swarmed out, flying straight into the smoke like drunks before crashing to the ground. They lay there powerless, but I didn't flinch, continuing to smoke the hive with a steady, patient rhythm until the buzzing stopped completely 5 minutes later. The golden honeycomb now sat exposed and defenseless. I drew my dagger immediately, sliced off a large section with a precise cut, and carefully placed it into my pot. Right then, a digital notification scrolled across my vision. Cold text appeared. Contestant Xiao Wu has obtained a rare resource, wild honeycomb. Activating bonus. 10,000x multiplier. The notification that the reward was being delivered flashed and faded, but I didn't let it distract me for a second. Instead, I gathered my gear and turned around, ready to move out. But just as I went to leave, my body tensed up instinctively. An intense, murderous bloodlust was radiating from the nearby bushes. A pair of eyes watched me through the branches, locked onto my back. Slowly, I lowered my canteen and my pot back down to the ground. I moved with such precision that I didn't make a single sound. Meanwhile, across countless regions of Manhwa, massive wild honeycombs began appearing out of thin air. At the high-level operations command center, phones were ringing off the hook. A total of 10,000 wild honeycombs had manifested nationwide, and as the news spread, all of Manhwa erupted in excitement. Meanwhile, in the broadcast studio, Chunyi kept his eyes glued to the screen. Xiao Wu's posture isn't normal. It looks like he's found something. In that instant, my muscles coiled tight as I focused every sense on my body. I stared toward those bushes until a full-grown gray wolf emerged. It kept its body crouched low, sniffing the air without stopping. I slowly moved my hand toward the pistol at my waist, my fingers inches from the grip. The gray wolf suddenly threw its head back and let out a long, piercing howl. My heart sank. I knew it was calling the rest of the pack. I drew my pistol in a blur of motion and fired. A single shot echoed through the darkness of the night. The bullet tore through the air a second later. It pierced the wolf's brain, sending its massive body crashing heavily to the ground. But it was already too late. More sounds began to rise in the distance. Howl after howl erupted, closing in from all sides. The pack was massive, and they were coming for me. I looked down at the wolf's carcass with a flash of grim pity. I gritted my teeth, grabbed my pot and canteen, and bolted. I sprinted toward the camp without a single glance behind me. In this moment, every second was the difference between life and death. Back at the site, Lung Yu had already heard the crack of my gunshot. She heard the howls and leaped up from the campfire, gripping her spear tight. Even though the sword wound on her thigh was still throbbing, Lung Yu shifted instantly into combat mode. She knew better than anyone what it meant to be hunted by a wolf pack. A flash of determination crossed her face as she thought, I won't be a burden to Wozen. She quickly shoved the supplies into her backpack. She drew her dagger and stood guard as hurried footsteps echoed from the forest. I burst out of the trees a moment later and pointed back toward the shadows. There's a pack of at least 7 wolves right on my heels. We have to move. Lung Yu nodded immediately and said, the river is fast. We can use it to hide our scent. I didn't waste a second and kicked dirt over the campfire to douse the flames. Then, Lung Yu and I abandoned the camp, running one after the other. We both moved at top speed through the suffocating darkness. I took the lead. I swung my machete wildly, hacking a path through the thick thorns and brush. Lung Yu followed right behind me, her face pale from the exertion. She was clearly in terrible pain, but she kept up as the growls closed in from all sides. The alpha wolf let out a sharp, commanding howl. The entire pack accelerated, lunging through the undergrowth after us. They were gaining ground fast. I could feel the bloodlust right at our backs, and it was getting closer with every step. Luckily, the sound of rushing water grew louder as the moonlight caught the river's gleam ahead. But suddenly, a gray wolf appeared like a ghost from the brush, lunging directly at Lung Yu. She had sensed it coming, though. She swung her machete with everything she had, bracing herself for the impact. But she was no match for the beast's raw speed. The wolf's jaws were wide open, inches away from snapping shut on her shoulder. I didn't hesitate. I spun around, raised my weapon, and fired. The bullet buried itself deep into the wolf's back. It hit the ground, howling in agony. It wasn't dead yet, but it was out of the fight. In that instant, the rest of the pack swarmed us from all sides. Countless pairs of glowing green eyes ignited in the dark forest. I realized we were trapped, so I grabbed Lung Yu's arm with an iron grip. I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Jump!" The second the word left my mouth, we both plunged into the freezing waters of the creek. The powerful current immediately swept us downstream. As we floated away, the wolf pack skidded to a halt at the riverbank. They didn't dare set a single paw in the water. They just stood there, staring us down with predatory intensity. Low, guttural growls of frustration echoed from the shore. But just as I thought we were finally safe, the situation shifted. The pack, led by a massive black wolf, suddenly began sprinting along both banks. They were tracking our movement through the water with terrifying speed. I felt a chill go down my spine as I realized they were planning to intercept us further down. Beside me, Lung Yu's face had turned a deathly shade of pale. She didn't even have the strength to speak, and I knew something was horribly wrong. I frowned and asked her what was happening, but her voice was just a raspy whisper. She told me her wound was infected, and my heart skipped a beat. In this environment, an infected wound was basically a death sentence. I used one arm to pull her close, fighting to keep her head above the rushing current. Meanwhile, the pack of monsters on the shore didn't let up for a second. They had split into two groups, flanking us from both sides of the river. They were pushing themselves to the limit to cut off our only escape route. Back in the broadcast studio, the host, Sun Sui, watched the screen in stunned silence. She was digging her nails into her palms so hard they nearly drew blood. Shinyi watched the screen, his face pale as he thought about the infection and the high fever. Without antibiotics in the wild, the mortality rate is over 80%. I was facing a devastatingly difficult decision. In the middle of the current, Lung Yu looked at me with determination and said, "I'm just a burden to you. Leave me and go downstream." I grit my teeth and snapped back, "Don't talk right now. And don't you dare fall asleep. If your life belongs to me, stay awake." Her life was hanging by a thread, but if death was coming for her, it wasn't going to be today. A second later, the chilling howls of the wolves echoed again. The pack was moving along the shore, tracking us. They pursued us relentlessly, refusing to give up the hunt. Lung Yu's body grew weaker by the second, so I adjusted my grip to carry her firmly in my arms. The creek water was freezing, chilling me to the bone. But Lung Yu's skin felt like glowing charcoal. She was burning up. I could feel her life force slowly fading away. To make matters worse, the wolf pack had already surrounded the lower part of the river. I steeled my resolve and steered us toward the bank, knowing I had to get us out of the water before it was too late. By the pale light of the moon, I spotted a sandbank where the current slowed down. I swam toward it with every ounce of strength I had left. By now, Lung Yu had completely lost consciousness. Only her shallow, ragged breathing proved she was still alive. I reached the shore and dragged her onto the sand just in time. But before I could even catch my breath, the sound of the pack's heavy paws thudded in the distance. I immediately scooped up her limp body. I felt the pressure mounting under the moonlight as I searched for cover. A dark cave entrance suddenly appeared on the mountain wall. I had no other choice, so I carried her and ran straight for the opening. Luckily, the cave was more spacious than I imagined. It was a natural stone cavern about 10 meters deep. The ground had a flat area that had clearly been cleared out. There were even small niches carved into the walls to hold supplies. Most importantly, the faint, lingering scent of smoke hung in the air. My heart skipped a beat. It was obvious that someone had lived here. But Lung Yu's wounds needed treatment immediately, and that was my only priority. I gently laid her down on the ground. I pulled out my first aid kit, but it only held the bare essentials. For an infection this severe, it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a cup of water. Right then, the howls of the pack echoed from outside the cave. I instinctively held my breath and raised my gun to protect Lung Yu. Moonlight slanted through the entrance, revealing dark shadows pacing back and forth. A gray wolf cautiously approached the opening. Its snout twitched incessantly, sniffing the air for any suspicious scent. Suddenly, Lung Yu let out a faint sound as her body spasmed. The gray wolf's ears perked up instantly. It was just about to poke its head into the cave. But then, the alpha's call rang out in the distance, making the wolf hesitate. Finally, it turned around and vanished into the night. I let out a long, shaky breath of relief. I waited until the sound of their heavy paws faded completely. Only then did I dare strike my flint to inspect the rest of the cavern. Deep inside, I found a makeshift stove made of stacked stones. Next to it sat a pile of dry firewood and an old tin can tucked into a wall niche. I opened the can and found the remains of some medicinal herbs inside. Lung Yu let out another low groan of pain. I turned back to her immediately, checking the wound on her head. Lung Yu's eyelids trembled as she struggled to speak, whispering, "I'm so cold." I knew her body was losing the battle to regulate its temperature because of the high fever. I moved quickly, taking the bare skin and wrapping it tightly around her body. Then I turned my attention to the pile of dry wood to start a fire. It didn't take long for the kindling to catch and the flames to grow. The rising heat began to push back the damp, freezing air of the cave. It was time to get to work. I started treating Lung Yu's wounds, which were swollen, red, and oozing yellow-green pus. I carefully cleaned the surface with water before using a damp cloth. I pressed it to her forehead, desperate to bring her fever down. Once that was done, I placed the metal pot over the crackling fire. I pulled out the bare meat and started prepping a hot soup for her. As the fire roared, my own soaked clothes finally began to dry. The warmth wrapped around me, finally letting my tense muscles and frayed nerves relax. While the soup simmered, I used my dagger to slice the bare meat into thin strips. I skewered them on a stick and held them over the open flames to roast. I reached into my pack for the honey and brushed it over the meat as I rotated it. I watched the fat sizzle, the sweetness caramelizing over the heat. Soon, the rich aroma of roasted meat and honey filled every corner of the cave. Lung Yu lay quietly on the bare skin, her fever breaking and her breathing finally steady. Seeing her like that, a wave of relief washed over me. I had finally done it. I sliced a piece of meat with my dagger and blew on it to cool it down. I popped it into my mouth, and the honey-glazed juices exploded instantly. As I chewed, I thought about the system's pattern. I should be able to check in tomorrow and claim a new reward. I wondered what it would be this time while enjoying the peace of the warm cave. I had no idea a storm was brewing that would sweep across everyone. At that moment, countless eyes were fixed on the countdown, 5 hours and 12 minutes until comms opened. Inside the Denigo Command Center, top officials were discussing their countermeasures. Regroup in the Central Mountains, eliminate anyone from Manhwa, and form an alliance with those who hate them. Meanwhile, in Moda's city, the Manhwa conference room was buzzing with leaders from 10 different nations. Defense Minister Chun Jung spoke up, warning that several nations were likely to unite against them. Right now, Xiaogua and Lengyu are stuck in the Central Mountains. Wang Xian found iron ore in the east, but the others are too far to reach them in time. The conference room fell into a grim silence. Finally, the minister said, when comms open, tell every participant to watch their backs.